Hey everyone, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. Today's lecture is going to be about what I have coined the Kramnik pass D pawn. And I guess this will be the only lecture you'll ever see on this topic because I made that up. And I made it up many years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago. And I'm surprised our sponsor knows about this because I don't say it very often, but I probably did years ago. Our sponsor's Robert Alford, so I want to thank him for sponsoring the lecture. He requested to try to include games with Anand, Topalov, and Nunn. Not sure how he picked those three. I mean, Anand and Topalov are pretty good. Nunn's not bad. And it turns out I was able to do so with all three players. And I think that sort of proves my point that Kramnik, when he wins with white, you know, when he was at the top of his form, now he's retired and somewhat nutty. But before he was nutty and he was a good player and he was one of the greatest players who ever lived, and he played great chess in the 90s and 2000s, possibly even the 2010s. But I mean, 90s and 2000s were his bread and butter. And I noticed just looking at his games, because I was a big fan, that often Kramnik would have a pass D pawn with the white pieces, with black not so much. And he would win because of it. And so I started calling it the Kramnik pass D pawn if another grandmaster or myself was winning a game because of that. I just called it the Kramnik pass D pawn because I noticed in so many of his games, especially when he was white, this was a common theme. And nobody else has ever mentioned it, so maybe I'm noticing something that's not there, but now I'm going to show games where it's there. And I think a lot of the time, in a lot of these games, but not necessarily the games I'm showing today, if you find a Kramnik pass D pawn, he's going to have white in a Grunfeld. I think when he's white in the Grunfeld, he often has a pass D pawn. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a Grunfeld, but that doesn't hurt. And it didn't take me very long to find games where Kramnik won because of his pass D pawn. I didn't have to do like 3 hours of research. I looked at 15 games, and in 4 of them, Kramnik had a pass D pawn and won because of it. So it must be quite common. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made up such a term. Okay, now first game is against Viswanathan. And this is from 1996 in Las Palmas when, Kramnik and Anand were both top 5 in the world in 1996. And I think Kramnik doesn't play E4 on move 1 a lot. And that's probably why he gets past D pawn so often. I think when you play English opening and knight F3 and C4 and D4 openings, you get past D pawns more. Okay, so he's playing Anand and playing sort of a Queen's Indian, Catalan, English mix. White hasn't played D4 yet, so right now I wouldn't know what to call this, although if white played D4 in this position, that's a straight up Queen's Indian by transposition. Okay, so Kramnik played rook E1. White wants to play E4, and try to get a bind on the position. And obviously with rook E1, you could play E4 next move. And white hasn't decided yet whether he's going to play D3 or D4, or whether his bishop is going to come out this way, or if he'll play B3 and fianchetto. White's position is very flexible, as is black's. Black could play C5, black could play D5, or black could play both. And we don't know yet. So, Okay, Anand played d5. This prevents e4. And he traded, he took with the knight. I guess if you take with the pawn, not only are you blocking your bishop, but you're also giving away the f5 square. So if white plays something like d4, not only could he play knight e5 later, but he could also try to play knight h4 to f5. So Anand takes with the knight and probably figures he's going to try to equalize by trading a lot of pieces. Sometimes these pieces get traded, and sometimes on the open diagonal, the bishops get traded later. And if we just keep trading, that should lead to equality. Okay, he played e4, takes, pawn takes, and now it's looking like a Grunfeld, except black doesn't have the Finegold bishop, so doesn't have the pressure on white center. c5, d4, and I probably could have included this game in my lecture last week on hypermodern chess. White is playing in the center, occupies the center, puts his pawns in the center, and black attacks the center. So black is playing in a hypermodern way, whether he wants to or not. Okay, knight d7, completing development. Bishop f4. They traded on d4, and Anand played knight f6, which attacks the pawn on e4. And white doesn't want to play e5 because that blocks the bishop, it stops knight e5, and it gives black the d5 square. White's pawns are actually better when they're together like this. So white doesn't want to play e5, and white has trouble playing d5 since black controls d5 so many times, and white obviously can't give up his e-pawn. Okay, so Kramnik played knight e5. This is a discovered defense of his e-pawn. Now his e-pawn is safe. Bishop b4, attacking the rook. The rook has to stay on the e-file, so it defends the e4 pawn. And e3 is a weird square, but it's safe. Rook c8. And here comes the Kramnik passed d pawn. And it's not clear if, in general, Kramnik would have played d5, but since he knows that I've coined the term Kramnik passed d pawn, he's sort of obliged to play d5. Otherwise, how am I going to make a lecture about him? And this was in 96, so he was pretty far thinking. He was looking ahead. And sometimes, in some games, the d-pawn gets weak and captured, and sometimes the d-pawn does not get weak, and it goes to d6 and d7, and it's quite annoying. Okay, so they traded on d5, and in this position, you would think, well, black has a lot of pieces on d5. Black is attacking d5 more than white's defending it. So how did Kramnik get away with that? Well, because Kramnik played rook e3, if you capture with one of the minor pieces, I can play rook d3, and that's a very nasty pin on your minor piece there. And so that's very dangerous to take on d5. And also, it ruins my lecture. And Anand and I have been friends for many years, so he wouldn't do that to me and take Kramnik's passed d pawn, then I couldn't lecture on this game. Okay, so he played bishop d6, blocking the pawn, making it less effective. Knight c6. So the passed d pawn not only can promote later, but it controls squares in black's position like c6. So black has a difficult choice here. Move the queen, or give up the two bishops and give white a pass pawn on c6, which is also dangerous. So it's a tough decision for black. He did take. Kramnik took on d6. Note, if Kramnik takes on c6 first, then his kingside pawn structure gets ruined. So he doesn't want that, so he takes on d6. Then bishop a4, attacking the queen. And that's the only move Anand can make which lets Kramnik maintain a passed d pawn. If he takes on d6, then Kramnik has a passed c-pawn, and this lecture doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes a little sense, but not a lot. And this position is obviously quite good for white because my bishop is so strong, my c-pawn is strong, and black's knight isn't really very good. It's just a great position for white. So Anand plays bishop a4. He wants to trade bishops, but he wants to blockade the d-pawn because it looks impossible to kick out whatever piece is blockading on d6. So he took on f8, sacrificing his queen. If he takes the bishop, and then I take the bishop, we have a Kramnik passed d-pawn, but I don't see how to go any further. I don't see how white gets to d6 or d7 or the pawn on c6 controlling, pawn on d5 controlling c6 doesn't really matter. My dogs are mad about it. So he brilliantly sacrifices his queen. Obviously black has to take the queen. And we play the Zwischenzug, bishop e7. If you just take the bishop and lose this bishop, then black's up a queen for a rook. And that's why the dogs are barking. So Kramnik saw he could play bishop e7. And because of the queen sacrifice, the d-pawn is very strong because we can control the squares d6, d7, and d8 and push our pawn. Anand saved his queen, and we take. So white has a rook and a bishop for a queen, but more importantly, white has two other advantages. White has the two bishops, black has 0 bishops, and this passed d-pawn, you can see why I said lectures on the Kramnik passed d-pawn, because that's pretty much of a Kramnik passed d-pawn. Okay, so Anand played knight d7, which blockades the d-pawn. Bishop h3, excellent square for the bishop, putting tremendous pressure. h6, getting luft, taking away the luft. Anand has 2-1 on the queen side, so let's get a pass pawn of our own. And Kramnik says, no, you're not going to do that. He plays bishop b4, blocking the pawn. And in this position, white wants to play the move rook to c3, putting tremendous pressure on all of black's pieces. So for example, here's a variation I made up. And it could be that I'm wrong because I made it up. If black plays a5 and I play rook c3 and you move your queen, now your queen's overworked. It's defending this and this and this. So I could just take on a5 and it's not good for black. Black's queen is defending too many pieces. So a5 doesn't work. So he played rook d8, trying to make rook c3 not as strong. So rook e7, it's pretty strong. Queen c4, attacking the bishop. And he trades pieces because now his passed pawn is irresistible. And d6, and white's going to play d7 and d8. And I don't know what black's going to do about that. Okay, so Anand attacked the rook on d1. Then he attacked the rook again. It was defended. He gave some checks. Kramnik knows to always repeat. So he did. Then he repeated again. Always repeat. And then he played king d1. And black is helpless to stop the Kramnik passed d-pawn. d7, and Anand resigned. Because lecture will make less sense if he promotes the pawn, because it won't be a pawn anymore. It'll be a queen. And nothing that black can do here. Obviously, black's only hope is perpetual check. And there ain't no perpetual check. There's maybe 2 or 3 checks if you're lucky. And the white king can easily escape the checks. And they made time control here. So Anand realized there's no way to stop d8 equals queen. So in that game, Kramnik did everything he could to keep his passed d-pawn and to make this lecture relevant. And when I was a professional player and going tournament to tournament and watching all of the games with the top players, I noticed Kramnik often had a pass D pawn and he won the game because of it. So I'm glad that somebody's sponsoring a lecture about it because we get to show all the examples. Okay, so if you're an Anand fan, you're not going to like this lecture very much because here's another game Anand lost to Kramnik. Of course, I could make an Anand lecture where he beats Kramnik every game, but that's not this lecture. Okay, this was played in Leon, which I think is in Spain, in 2002. And they used to do this, and now they don't do it. They used to have tournaments where a strong grandmaster, a very strong grandmaster, like Super GM, would play with an engine. And it would be the engine and the grandmaster versus another engine and grandmaster. And they would sit in different rooms and they would talk about what's going on to a live audience. And they stopped doing that, I guess, probably in 2002. Grandmaster might have some input. And probably in 2024, we don't need the grandmaster. We just turn the engine on and all the games would be drawn. So I guess that tournament doesn't make sense now. Probably a lot of people rated 1500 could play in that event with their engine and not lose to a super grandmaster and engine today. Okay, so this game should be very well played because the players have an engine to use. And probably in 2002, the engines didn't know what the Kramnik pass D pawn was. So if only Anand's team had made some adjustments to the engine, then maybe things would have turned out differently. Okay, so same knight f3. We get to a d4 opening. Queen's Gambit accepted by transposition. I've had white and black in this position, mainly white. I don't think I've played bishop b3. I've played bishop d3. Okay, and I always take with the pawn to get an isolated pawn position. And by taking with the pawn, you're allowed to get your bishop out, and your pawn controls squares in black's territory. And if black had taken with the knight or the queen, if white had taken with the knight or the queen, I know which color it is, then this game wouldn't be in the lecture, obviously, because title of the lecture. Okay, so isolated queen pawn position, Queen's Gambit accepted. Very normal kind of position. And in this position, black can decide to play h6 or knight b4 to control d5, or to play bishop d7, or to play for b5, or to play knight a5. Lots of different options. Anand chose the knight a5 option. He wants to take the bishop on b3. Kramnik doesn't want to lose his bishop. Now b5. Black wants to play bishop to b7 and knight c4, and black has, good position. Rook d1, knight c4 attacking the queen. Queen f4 sacrifices his b pawn because he's going to get to attack against the black king by playing something like queen h4. So Anand plays rook a7, which is an interesting move. A lot of times in the Queen's Gambit accepted, black will play rook a7 to d7, keeping an eye on the isolated pawn, and the bishop goes to b7, and black's pieces are all on excellent squares. Knight e5. Can't play rook d7 now, and white wanted to play knight c6, so rook c7, knight takes knight, pawn takes, bishop takes, and d5. And this is very annoying for black because white is threatening to take on e6 with the discovered attack on the queen, and white wouldn't mind playing d6 either and getting an attack past d pawn on d6. And it's difficult for black to take on d5 because after knight takes d5, we have a lot of pressure here and even the c pawn is weak. So this looks very tough for black. I'm not sure what move black should make here, but it looks really dangerous. So Anand played e5, attacking the queen. And unfortunately for Anand, this gives white the Kramnik pass d pawn. Queen f3, and this pawn is certainly not weak. It's defended 3 times, and it's only attacked once, and I can defend it with my bishop on e4 if I need to, and more importantly, my knight can go on e4. Even though black has the 2 bishops, neither bishop is very good, especially the bishop on f6, which is completely blocked. Okay, rook b7, threatening the pawn on b2. Queen e4, threatening checkmate. Queen takes h7 mate. Anand saw mate in 1. He had his engine helping, just in case. Queen c4, white is a pawn ahead. Rook b2, black regains material equality. And bishop b3, trapping the rook. And, I mean, this pawn is looking really good now. It looks like it's going to advance. And the knight has the excellent e4 square. The rook is somewhat trapped on b2. So I don't like black's position. For example, if it was Kramnik's turn, he could play knight a4, attacking the rook, and the rook is trapped. So white has lots of advantages. Bishop g5. This way the rook isn't trapped anymore. It can go to d2. d6. Here comes the Kramnik passed pawn. Bishop e6. Queen a4. They traded. Black no longer has the 2 bishops. And looks like the pawn's going to d7 pretty soon. Queen b6. Queen g4, attacking the bishop. Knight d5, attacking the queen. Queen goes to d8. If the queen takes the pawn on d6, then knight takes with a discovered attack on the queen, and white wins a piece. And I guess you could try to play queen takes b3, but then this pawn is pretty strong. I could play knight e7 check and d7 and knight c6 and queen. So queen d8 is the safest move. We stop knight f6 check, and we stop the pawn from queening. Knight takes, d7. That's not a Kramnik pass pawn. I don't know what is. Kramnik doesn't care about capturing this pawn. He doesn't care about black capturing this pawn. He only cares about his pass pawn on d7. And when I was a kid, I read something that's very interesting that said a pass pawn on the 7th rank is worth a rook. And in my praxis and my looking at grandmaster games and playing my own games, I would modify that just based on my own experience and say a pass pawn on the 7th is worth more than a rook. So black is completely lost because white has a pass pawn on the 7th rank that's not going to get captured. Now, today, which is Monday, April 1st, so I should be making lots of April Fool's jokes, but I've done that my whole life, so I'm getting tired of that. But there was a game played today at Grenke in the Open tournament in the Masters round robin, the Grandmasters round robin, between Magnus Carlsen and Richard Rapport. And in that game, Magnus was sacrificing material. Eventually, Magnus was down a piece intentionally. And his compensation was he had a pass pawn on the 7th rank. And he ended up winning the game because the pawn was just too strong. So you see that a lot when there's a pass pawn on the 7th rank and it doesn't get captured right away, then often that side is winning relatively quickly. And the name of this lecture, and in particular Kramnik himself, it's usually a D pawn for Kramnik. Maybe for other people, they have another passed pawn that's... In Carlsen's game today, it was a passed H pawn, but that's Carlsen. Okay, so Anand took the pawn on b3. Queen takes f4. Rook b8, very passive. Rook e1. Material's equal, but the pawn on d7 is too strong. Put it in h. He wants to play h5, h6, and he wants to get loof for his king. So h4 is a good move. And I mean, black just has to stop the d-pawn from queening, so black can't get active. And typically, black would want to trade queens here and go into an ending, which is what he did. But unfortunately, Kramnik just easily wins the endgame because black's pawns are all messed up. So that actually didn't help. Rook takes a6. And in this position, white's going to play rook e5 and take these pawns. Black can't play rook b7 because I play rook e8 check and I win. But black actually can't move the rook at all vertically because rook e8 check wins. And if black does nothing, white plays rook e5 and takes these pawns. So in this position, Anand resigned. And basically, he couldn't get any counterplay or do anything because white's pass pawn was on d7, which we've now seen in both Kramnik and Anand games. White got a pawn to d7 and black resigned. And black didn't have any counterplay against it. Okay, that's enough Anand bashing. Now we're going to do some Topalov bashing. And basically, the sponsor of the lecture, he said, is it possible that I show games with Anand, Topalov, and Nunn? And so that sponsor has rights. And this is a game against Topalov. This was played in 1996 at the Euwe Memorial in Amsterdam. Knight f3 again, c4. Get some kind of English, Queen's Indian, Catalan, Hedgehog, double fianchetto. Not much trading, very hyper-modern chess. And d4, and d5. And a lot of players would not allow d5, but Topalov is a very combative player, and he doesn't mind getting positions that look like the Benoni, because he'll play the Benoni with black, unlike most super GMs. So most super GMs in this position would play c takes d4 and get sort of a hedgehog English type of position. But Topalov doesn't mind if white plays d5 and we get this Benoni type position. And he plays knight h4, which you don't necessarily have to do that, but probably Kramnik was worried if he took right away that black could play b5. And white has to decide, do we give black counterplay or do we take on b5 and lose the d5 pawn? So instead of making that decision, he just played knight h4, which pins the pawn to the bishop, and we can take back later, and the knight likes to go to f5 anyway. Knight h4 is a typical move in these kinds of positions. Okay, g6, stopping knight f5. And we have a Benoni position, except the bishop's on e7 instead of g7. So it seems like a good Benoni for white. Knight e8, black wants to take on h4. f4, he says, you can take it, I'll get the two bishops, and I'll get all the dark squares, and I'll advance my kingside pawns. Topalov decides not to take it, plays knight c7 with the idea of b5, and putting pressure on the d5 pawn. e4, b5, e5. So Kramnik is just playing in the center, and he's advancing his center, and Topalov is hoping that he gets queenside counterplay, and that white center falls apart. f5, that's a very, I don't want to say bad move. It's a move you can't take back. So once you play f5, there's no going back. So he permanently is stopping knight e4, which white would like to do at some point. He's controlling the e4 square, and he's trying to blockade everything in the center. Like if white plays e6, which looks tremendous, then it's not clear how white goes forward. So he played a4, attacking on the queen side, b4, knight to b5, And they traded. Queen b6, rook e1, and obviously this is a tremendous center for white. White is willing to get doubled pawns here and even sacrifice a pawn because of his beautiful pawn center. And he does sacrifice a pawn. Bishop f1, always play bishop f1, and bishop c4. So even though black is a pawn up on the queen side, actually 2 pawns up on the queen side, white has total blockade of black's queen side play, and white's dominating in the center. Queen d8, takes on d6, and bishop f6. So black has a tough decision here. He can take on d6, can take on h4, and he can play bishop f6. Takes on h4, then this bishop is going to be too strong, and my rook is going to have the e7 square. And this bishop is blocked, so I think after rook e7, black's not going to last very long. Okay, so bishop takes d6 is also possible, but he didn't want this bishop to be on this nice diagonal, and so he played bishop f6 to trade bishops. Queen d2, he traded the bishops, and queen f6, he wants to go into the ending because white is worried about black is worried about his king. Queen f2, knight b6, rook d1, rook e8, trades rooks, and takes on c5. Now Kramnik has 2 passed d pawns, 1 for each of you. Black tries to get counterplay, gets his pieces active, and Kramnik has 2 passed pawns, and he plays d7, threatening d8 queen. And this gets out of the way of the other passed pawn, so we can start an attack against black's king. Knight takes d7 is forced. Queen b5, forking the pieces and attacking the rook on e2. In this position, if we take the rook on e2, we lose our queen. And so that's why he played d7, very tactical. Now he's threatening the bishop, the knight, and the rook. And the passed d pawn is actually playing defense. It's blocking the bishop on b7. If that pawn wasn't there, black would be winning with rook takes g2 check. Obviously, white would have played differently. Okay, rook takes, always sack the exchange. Queen c2 check with a fork. Bishop e2 defending his rook. Knight b6. King f2 defending his bishop. The queen was going to get overworked here defending this and this, so he defends his bishop, and he gets off this diagonal. King g7, and here comes the other passed d pawn. White just wants to play d6, d7, or d7, d8. Bishop c6, and after queen takes b4, black doesn't have any counterplay. White can centralize the queen with queen d4 check, and not only is white up in exchange, but white has this passed pawn on d6, which is going to win the game for him eventually, and Topalov resigned. So that game was twice as good as the first 2 games, because Kramnik had 2 Kramnik passed d pawns, and he sacrificed one, then pushed the other. And as a consequence, he won material by forcing black's pieces to deal with the d pawn. So another excellent game from Kramnik. Now, not as famous in chess as Topalov and Anand, former world champions, is John Nunn. And John Nunn was probably at his peak about 10th in the world. He played on the British Olympic team probably like 10 times. And that was a weird noise. It sounded like somebody came in, but nobody could have come in. So, and the dogs are barely barking. Anyway, maybe it's Kramnik's d pawn coming for a visit. Nunn is very well known, not only in chess, but he's also known in math. Got a PhD very young. He used to lecture math. Maybe he still does. And he retired from chess for a long time, and now he plays in these senior tournaments, the World Senior Championship and the World Senior Team Championship and such, mainly and such. And the dogs don't like it. Okay, so last but not least, we have a game that was played in the Olympiad. Obviously, it was Russia versus England, and this was in 1992 in Manila. And the only Olympiad I attended was in 1990 in Novi Sad, Yugoslavia. The country no longer exists, but Novi Sad is still there. So I wasn't at this Olympiad. And 1992, England had a very good Olympiad team. Okay, so Kramnik has white, and Nunn likes to play the King's Indian, so he played the King's Indian. We can't stop him. And Kramnik plays the same-ish variation. Kramnik also famous for playing the bayonet, which is in the classical King's Indian, which I used to play. Although I used to play the same-ish also, and I would play the move Bishop G5 when I was a kid. Bishop E3 is more common. Nunn plays a pawn sacrifice, because Nunn always plays the most aggressive testing way. Kramnik likes being a pawn up. Okay, this is all a main line, knight c6. So white's up a pawn, but his development here isn't very good. And black has, good piece play. This is all theory. Bishop a3, a5. Black wants to play knight b4. Rook d1. Bishop e6. Knight d5. And you're probably wondering if this lecture's about the Kramnik pass d pawn. Where's his d pawn? He'll get a d pawn later. Give him a break. You don't always have to have a d pawn, but eventually you should have one. Okay, bishop takes d5. So white not only wants to win a second pawn, but knight c7 is also quite annoying. That would really mess up black's pawn structure. You can't take with the knight because you'd be walking into a fork. So you don't want to do that. So he takes with the bishop and knight b4. Black would like to play knight c2 check and ruin white's pawn structure. Black wouldn't mind bishop takes, pawn takes, and the rook on a8 is very active. So bishop b5 was played, developing a piece. Knight c2. He did take on a3. And even though white's pawn structure is compromised on the queen side, white does have an extra pawn. So, and it's an endgame. It's opposite colored bishops. There's a lot of pieces on the board. e6. Nunn must have known about my Kramnik passed d pawn, so he wanted to make it past. d6. And probably Nunn thought, if Kramnik plays d6, I can try to win that pawn, and then it'll be even material. And Kramnik must have thought, no, he's not going to win that pawn. I'm just going to have a nice advanced pass pawn. And you can see either one in games, but when I'm doing a lecture about Kramnik's pass d pawn, you're not going to see him just lose it for nothing, because that would be a silly lecture. Although it is April Fool's. So this would be a good time for Kramnik to lose his pawn and Nunn just crushes him. And then I say April Fool's. Okay, so Nunn played e5. He's worried that white's going to play e5, so he stops it. Knight e2, bishop f8, threatening to capture the pawn immediately. d7. So in every game, Kramnik got to play d7 with his passed pawn on the d file. And it's funny, when I look at Morphy games, Morphy does brilliant winning tactics all the time. And I'm trying to think in my chess career, how often do I do brilliant winning tactics like Morphy did? Like Morphy does it every game, and I do it like once every 3 years. Some kind of brilliant tactic. And I think the same about the Kramnik pass d pawn. Kramnik gets his pass d pawn to d6 and d7 all the time. And I'm thinking, how come my pass pawn's never on d7? How come I'm always, my pass pawns are on the second rank and they're not dangerous? I can't show you game after game where I have a pass pawn on the 7th rank. But with Kramnik, I can. So that's why I named it after him. Okay, bishop takes a3. Nunn got his pawn back. g4. Wants to play g5 and make sure the knight can never put pressure on d7. h6, h4. a4. Nunn wants the passed Nunn a pawn, but it's not passed. Rook d3 attacks the bishop. g5. He kicks the knight away from the passed d pawn. And Nunn says, oh boy, I could win this pawn. That would be good. And Kramnik protects it. Rook a5 attacking the bishop. Rook d5 defending. Never play f6. He's holding on to his center. And he sacrifices the exchange, basically because always sacrifice the exchange. And I think f6 is the losing move because he sacrificed the exchange. Although, again, in the long run, with the passed pawn on d7 and the rook is just sitting here, I mean, white's up a rook. We're just playing chess and your rook can't leave d8. That's terrible. And that's probably why Nunn played bishop b2 to stop rook c1 and rook c8. So what black is doing is saying, please don't promote your d-pawn. And probably if Nunn had his druthers, at some point soon, but he can't do it now, he would sacrifice the exchange himself. He would take on b5 and take on d7. Unfortunately, he can't do that because his bishop on b2 isn't protected. So if he played rook takes and rook takes, he'd lose his bishop. So first he played f6, trying to get rid of all of white's pawns on the king's side. And now Kramnik gets more passed pawns by sacking the exchange. And now white has lots of passed pawns. White wants to take this and play f7 and e6. And if you take, I can play f7 or e5, e6. And both rooks are just useless. And again, if I was black, I would really want to play rook takes and rook takes d7, but I can't because my bishop is hanging on b2. Okay, so he took on f4, and then e5, and Kramnik has 3 connected passed pawns, and one of them's on the 7th rank, one's on the 6th, and one's on the 5th. And if white could keep moving, white could play knight takes f4 and knight e6. Not sure how to stop that. He played king h6, knight takes f4, bishop takes e5, getting rid of one of the passed pawns, but okay. And now the idea is, if you take my rook, I take your rook. Hooray! Nunn got rid of the Kramnik passed d pawn. Unfortunately, there's a tactical trick which is really cool. Unless you have the black pieces, then it's a tactical trick that you missed. Okay, and Kramnik took the rook anyway. And after takes, white has a very nice winning sequence here. This would be like if you were doing puzzles on chess.com or Lichess, this could be one of the puzzles. This would be a nice puzzle. Kramnik played f7, and Nunn realized, oops, what I did doesn't work. He was losing anyway, so it wasn't like he blundered. He was going to lose. And he realized the only way to prevent white from queening is the move king g7. Rook f5 doesn't work because there's a bishop. And now white has 2 ways to win. White can play knight takes g6 directly, but it seems cooler to just queen and then do the fork at the end. And you can't even go here and win the bishop because that's illegal. So you have to move away and then you're down 2 pieces. And I assume, I haven't calculated it, that knight g6 also wins. Yeah, it's also winning. But instead of giving Kramnik a choice of which way to win, after f7 he resigned, Nunn did. Which I think is funny that Kramnik had the pass d7 pawn for maybe 10 moves. Finally, Nunn gets rid of it by sacrificing material, and then the passed f7 pawn wins. So too many advanced passed pawns. And even though Nunn is going to have passed pawns, they're not dangerous. They haven't moved yet. Third rank, second rank, potential passed pawns. But White's passed pawns were serious. Anyway, I didn't have to look at many games to find those. So I'm guessing if you look at random games that Kramnik won with White in the 90s and 2000s, you'll see a lot of games where he has a pass D pawn. And that's why I named it the Kramnik pass D pawn. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. And it's too bad what happened to Kramnik, that now he basically accuses everybody of cheating, but he still has the pass D pawn. Thanks to our sponsor, Robert Olford. If you want to sponsor a lecture, please contact my wife, Karen. Her email is karen@hclchessclub.com, and you too can sponsor a lecture. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.